Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to hand you over to Michael McMillan, who's going to be leading the session this evening. And yeah, take advantage. He's great. So over to you, Michael, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you for inviting me. Thanking you for giving me the space to give this presentation this evening. Sorry, the music you heard was more for kind of me to get me in the mood, as it were. And so I'm going to begin with a quote from James Baldwin, and he says that history is not in the past, it is in the present, because we carry our histories with us. Now, I come from a school of Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, and in the Poetics of Liberation, this anti-lecture will focus on the process of what became a practice-based PhD. The journey took 10 years and responded to a paradigm shift in my practice, from writing plays to making the front room as an installation. Rather than product, my research looked on the creative decision-making process in developing the front room in the context of expert intuitive operations. In other words, what is the work that finishes the work? So you're going to see here a series of images associated of the front room, different iterations of the front room. And you see here a photo of myself and one of my sisters, Valerie, dressed in clothes we had no choice over. That's probably why I look so miserable, but it's actually taken in the front room. So let me tell you the Jackanory, the story. I began a conventional PhD at Manchester Metropolitan University in 1999. As a playwright and theatre practitioner, I had written articles about Black theatre practice in British and African diasporic contexts before, and so it seemed only natural a subject for PhD research. At this moment, while there were second productions of my plays going on, I wasn't commissioned to make any new work. So to pay the rent, I was writing and editing books. Now, this is the reality for many arts practitioners, which is compounded by the cultural politics of the cultural industries for Black artists. I was also a painter before I was a writer, and now my practice seemed to shift towards the visual through live art stroke performance art and mixed media installation. This would ultimately conspire to shift not only the focus of my PhD, but the type of PhD I would eventually complete. Oral history had always been part of my practice, and at this moment I was also immersed in a year-long residency as a writer in High Wycombe, a provincial town in Buckinghamshire where Vincentians of my parents' generation, the Windrush generation, had settled. It was also where I was born before my family moved to London. Out of the residency emerged the Black Boy Pub and Other Stories, the Black Experience in High Wycombe, an anthology of writings and oral histories that I edited. It was while carrying out oral history interviews in the front rooms of Caribbean elders in High Wycombe that I had a déjà vu experience. I was in the same room, though each room was different. Growing up, the aesthetics of the front room felt like nails scratching a blackboard for me, because it seemed to embody the Protestant work ethic. It was in bad taste, or had no taste at all. It was kitsch. Through this epiphany, I realized that the front room was intrinsic to the formation of my own Black British identity, and that if I had such an ambivalence, then others of my generation and cultural background would also share in their also, therefore the front room was worth exploring as an artwork. Now, emanating from the Victorian parlour, the front room is where rituals of hospitality take place. Now called the living room, the sitting room, or lounge, the stuff in this room, how it is used and what it means, reflect how the family want to represent themselves externally. This impression management is expressed in the maxim that if the family is poor, if the front room looks good, then they are respectable. Black people, on the other hand, are portrayed as if they live on the streets, making trouble with no homes to go to, no families, no values. And as a consequence, British social and design history has paid little attention to Black material culture in the home. And that is signified by the front room. Stuart Hall, from the book that I edited, the Front Room, Migrant Aesthetics in the Home, he says, the front room is a conservative element of Black domestic life, which is more complex and richer than the generality of the society ever understands. The local Wickham Museum asked me to mount an exhibition based on the Black Boy Pub book, and I decided to create an installation based on the front room. The museum had no money, but necessity being the mother of invention, and coming from a community arts practice where we created something from nothing, I borrowed some of my auntie's radiogram, her sofa and drinks cabinet, as well as my mum's crochet. This was the first iteration of what became the West Indian front room. You see actually an image of it here. Now, the term West Indian speaks to a particular moment of post-war Caribbean migration. As a form of antiphony, the front room called out to a cultural community of interest who responded with donations of artifacts, knowledge, and their own stories about the front room, because it resonated with their own lived experience of growing up Black in Britain. Now, with the best intentions, I sensed that my appointed supervisor, Director of Studies at MMU, Manchester Metropolitan University, didn't really understand Black theatre and therefore was unable to support the development of my research. I shared my concerns with a Black colleague, Lola Young, now Baroness Lola Young. She understood my sense of intellectual isolation at MMU, and working at Middlesex University, she advised me to bring my PhD there. I had taught on a Black theatre model at Middlesex before, so I felt that the environment would be more conducive for developing my research. My new Director of Studies there was pleasant but ineffective, offering little critique of my writing, and as I later discovered, had not supervised a PhD to completion before. This wasn't necessarily her fault, bless her, but reflected the lack of support from the institution. In the meantime, the West Indian front room was now at the the Jeffrey Museum. It's now actually called the Museum of the Home. In 2005 and 2006, and it became the most popular exhibition because it resonated cross-culturally beyond the Black British experience with other migrant and working class communities in terms of respectability through domestic material culture. From then on, subsequent iterations were simply called the front room. Now, from the success of the success at the Jeffrey Museum came additional Arts Council funding to develop a dedicated front room website. There was also the BBC 4 documentary, Tales from the Front Room, in 2007, and an iteration of the front room in the Netherlands called Van House Out, the living room of migrants in the Netherlands, where I worked with Moroccan, Indonesian, Surinamese, and Antillean migrant communities. And this iteration, or installation-based exhibition, actually toured the Netherlands. I didn't have much time to focus on my PhD at this moment, and besides, my practice had moved into a new area. Under the circumstances, I don't understand to this day why my Director of Studies departed from Middlesex. See here now Susan Melrose, who arrives from the Sorbonne in Paris. She was a breath of fresh air and becomes Professor of Performance Arts and Head of Research at Middlesex. Susan is a wise older woman, and taking me under her wing, she tells me, Michael, you make this course. We study it in the academy, and you're a practitioner, not an academic. So why not shift towards a practice-based PhD? The penny dropped. Her advice made complete sense. It was Susan Melrose, as my director of studies, that I began my practice-based research. She brought a discipline to my research process, now focused on the creative decision-making process of making the front room. And after completing iterations of the front room in the Netherlands, I had little work in the UK, which provided me the time to devote an intensive 2 years towards creating what would become a mixed mode submission. This included an interactive CD-ROM that featured different ethnographic research, education, archives, and exhibition aspects of the front room project, a DVD of the Tales from the Front Room documentary, the book, The Front Room, Migrant Aesthetics in the Home, that was published in 2009 by Black Dog, and a 30,000-word dissertation. After Van House Out, I also did a month-long residency in the Netherlands, where I created under a tree an installation called A Living Room Surrounded by Salt. And I'm kind of going to move. These are some of the images here from the exhibition, the West Indian Front Room at the Jeffrey Museum. And this is the listening post. Amazingly, you know, these boys were touching this phone. They didn't really know what it was because they were unfamiliar with this, you know, this analog dialed phone. And here is Van House Out, actually in the Netherlands. This is in a gallery called Imagine I See in the Heart in the southeast region of Amsterdam called a Belma. And this is a living room surrounded by salt. And I want to tell you a little story about this installation. It was made from found and donated objects. And in this migrant area, I was told the installation would only last a day because people would just take stuff. But it's also surrounded by a line of salt. And salt was mined in Curaçao. Curaçao is part of the Dutch Antilles. It's basically a Dutch colony off the coast of Venezuela. And salt is also used in a lot of kind of rituals across the African diaspora. I was told later, after 2 weeks, that nobody took anything because they thought a ritual was going on. I was performing some kind of spiritual ritual. And so it lasted for 2 weeks because they thought the salt was in fact a part of that ritual. Now, other iterations that I'll kind of share with you, this is also Passages. This installation of the front room, iteration of the front room was made for a film shoot at the Royal Court Theatre. And there were 7 films from 7 monologues. And the front room was used as a site of performance. And here's actually the film shoot taking place in the actual room that I actually made. So I'm going to move on now to kind of thinking about the practice theoretical, in other words, praxis. Now, by the time of writing up the dissertation, I had built an expert practice, to use Susan Melrose concept, towards iteration of the front room. As I've just kind of told you, I mean, there's several of iterations emerging now. In a sense, this is a kind of unfolding ontology and was part, in a sense, of a kind of epistemic culture that comes after Cole Katina in producing knowledge about the front room. The more I knew about the front room was the less I knew about it. And this knowing valorizes a kind of an intuition that comes after Immanuel Kant, Henry Bergson, and Gilles Deleuze. and goes beyond, in a sense, the everyday notion of intuition. This is the intuition of the dressmaker or tailor who cuts a garment with no need of measurement, just viewing the body of the wearer, a form of disciplinary mastery. An expert intuitive method in artist decision-making corresponds to Bergson's idea of duration or becoming as an integral experience that resembles that of the writer who knows how and what material to edit, how to assemble, insert and delete, a form of collection and division, carried out rapidly and apparently without conscious thought, because that thought has already occurred in the past. Bergson also equated memory with intuition, in that memory conserves the past. But I would add here that the trope of memory is to forget. Now, Toni Morrison's concept of rememory rescues memory, in a sense, this memory, this trope of forgetting for the creative artist, who draws on fragments of the archive to recreate a kind of truth. And I will always say with the front room, my attempt in making it was not about a heritage-orientated facsimile of what my parents created, but rather a second-generation interpretation, because during the 1970s, I was rebelling against this space. For me, it kind of signified the coloniality that I was kind of struggling against, and young people, black people of my generation were resisting and rebelling against. So I'm still ambivalent about the front room. It's complex, it's contradictory. And in a sense, that idea of rememory fits here as a contested space. Now, duration, therefore, makes and unmakes, in the sense that it offers a relatively open future, which includes the fracturing and opening of the past and the present to what is becoming. Now, Stuart Hall talks about this idea of becoming in the context of diaspora identity formation. Sorry, I'm having a drink there. For him, diaspora does not refer us to those scattered tribes whose identity can only be secured in relation to some sacred homeland to which they must at all costs return. Diaspora is more of a metaphor, in a sense, not defined by essence or purity, but recognition of a necessary heterogeneity and diversity by a conception of identity that lives with and through as process, the idea of difference by hybridity. The symbolic journeys that diaspora Black subject took, Hall suggests, was a process of becoming, as well as being, which belongs to the future as much as it does to the past. Diaspora identity is continually being negotiated through a complex historical process of appropriation, compromise, subversion, masking, invention, and revival, as Hall suggests. Diaspora identities are similar yet different, and in the process of becoming, multiple subject positions are negotiated. The multiplicity of subject positions resonates with W.E.D. Du Bois' idea of double consciousness, as postulated in his classic 1903 essay Of Our Spiritual Strivings, which is in the book Souls of Black Folk. In other words, and I'll give you an example of double consciousness, Paul Gilroy kind of talks about double consciousness, and one of the ideas is that people of color, much less people of African descent, see themselves through a kind of white racist society. But I'll give you an example here from my lived experience. I'm born in the UK, as I've mentioned earlier, but I've never called British, or more precisely, English, except when I leave the country. There's a kind of double consciousness. I'm part of this society, and yet I'm not. In Stuart Hall's seminal essay, Reconstruction Work, he relooks at documentary images of post-war black settlement in Picture Post's 1956 pictorial essay, 30,000 Color Problems. In the documentary realism of the photographs, the black subjects are portrayed as social problems that in the British popular imaginary is a code for the racial problem of immigration, ergo Brexit. Both my parents came here as part of the Windrush generation. I was born in England. Growing up and living black in Britain, I am symbolically one of those social problems. And yet in my practice theoretical, I am engaged with the labor of reconstruction work. A feature of the creative process is disorder, though, which often means returning to our original aim or question, as in a circular feedback loop. A spiral which constantly returns us to our original point of entry, but with renewed understanding. This hermetic interpretive spiral model, first developed by Gestalt theorist Kurt Lewin, is relevant here. Melissa Trinningham suggests that in expert or professional terms, the feedback loop is more or less constant, and this allows for often invisible tinkering. In a sense, the circular feedback loop relates to kind of action research method, the action research method. And I'm always kind of, the circular feedback loop is kind of germane to kind of arts practice, because one begins with a kind of question, an inquiry, something to one wants to explore. One carries out some form of research and then realize that that original kind of question or intention has to be adapted. This is, in a sense, the feedback loop. Now, my return to the Museum of the Home, formerly the Jeffrey Museum, came through writing and directing Waiting for Myself to Appear. And this was first performed in the Jeffrey Arms House display rooms in 2019. It's a one-woman show that I wrote and directed. And here you have an image from the film installation with Esther Niles. The work weaves together contemporary and historic stories through the voice of Alicia Gumbs, a young black Caribbean woman working in growing up in a gentrified Hackney. She works at the Jeffrey Museum, which is named after Sir Robert Jeffrey. And during the performance, she interviews Sir Robert Jeffrey. And he declares that his wealth during the 18th century came from investments in the East India Company, which drove British colonialism and imperialism in India and East Asia. He also invested in the Royal Africa Company, which chartered the China Merchant for 2 voyages, a slave ship that Jeffrey part owned. Now, as part of the triangular trade of transatlantic chattel enslavement, British goods were sent to West Africa and traded for enslaved African women and children, who were then transported to plantations in the Caribbean and Americas with valuable commodities like sugar and cotton returning to Britain. So here's the kind of triangular trade. As a result of his wealth and power, Robert Jeffrey, Bob, became Sheriff of London, Alderman, Lord Mayor of London, Master of the Ironmongers Company, and he was also knighted. With no heirs, Jeffrey left the bulk of his wealth to build the almshouse for the poor in memory of his own humble background. What's interesting with the almshouse at the Jeffrey Almshouse, is that initially they were for the poor, but over time, over a period of 200 years, say, it became a luxury retirement home for retired governesses, widows, and spinsters. What's also fascinating about the at that time, early 20th century, with the urbanization of East London, and the Jeffrey Museum is located in near Shoreditch, Hoxton, and Haggerston. there were social tensions basically between these middle-class residents and the almshouse and the local population, and who were largely slum dwellings, and there was tensions over notions of kind of debauchery and vagabonds and drunken behavior. Eventually, the ironmongers company, and ironmongers is interesting because actually they were ones who made kind of chains during enslavement. They sold up because the land in which the Jeffrey Almshouse was now built became prime real estate. They sold up and relocated the almshouse to Kent. And it was at this time in 1914 that the Jeffrey Museum was created. So this is a bit of backstory. Now, getting back to Alicia, who works at the museum, she discovers in the archives that an orphaned Grace Belmore Sweeney was escorted to Britain by her black wet nurse from Spanish Town, Jamaica, in the late 19th century. Grace grows up and eventually marries the Jeffrey Almshouse chaplain, the Reverend Henry Baker. But nothing more is documented about the black nurse, and this is actually based on historical fact. This is the black nurse is mentioned in the diary by Ernest Baker, who is one of the sons of Henry Baker and Grace Belmore Sweeney. But to give her a life and give her a name, Alicia reimagines and becomes Marianne. And in the performance, she invites the audience to come on a journey in this reimagination. Waiting for Myself to a Play explores themes about the colonial exploitation of black women's bodies, their struggles to survive the trauma of diaspora migration, and making a home in post-imperial Britain. The performance was filmed and forms the basis of a triptych film installation created in collaboration with Dub Morphology. And it was actually located in the chapel at the Jeffrey Museum, which is now the Museum of the Home as of last year, but is now going to actually be sited in the actual 19th century almshouse display rooms. Now, with the turn of Black Lives Matter, I proposed the front room as a permanent 1970s period room at the Museum of the Home. For me, this was a kind of political strategy, you know. I'm kind of done with kind of the temporary October Black History Month kind of iteration. I'm born here. I'm not going anywhere. So having it there as a permanent installation is symbolic of the kind of Black presence in Britain. And this opened last year in the summer 2021. This is an image here of the front room at the Museum of the Home. Now, along the same time, there have been demands from staff at the museum and the local Hackney community for the statue of Sir Robert Jeffrey to be removed from the front of the building. And the Department of Culture, in their wisdom, have threatened the museum that if the statue is removed, they will cut their funding. But as Walter Benjamin once said, every monument of civilization is a monument of barbarism. The Jeffrey Almshouse was built from the profits of empire, and towards decolonizing the museum, this history needs to be made transparent against a kind of history of coloniality of our time. The current iteration of the front room is in Life Between Islands. And this is a group show which features 56 artists and speaks to Caribbean British art from the 1950s to now, currently at Tate Britain until April 2022. Now, the front room here is different to the front room at the Museum of the Home. It belongs to Joyce, in honor of my late aunt who passed away to COVID last year. Joyce is a single, childless woman from an educated middle-class background who teaches at local Saturday school. She wouldn't call herself an activist, but Joyce attends meetings, and as a woman of style, she holds house parties in her front room that disturb the neighbors. Now, 50 years on, and the house that my parents bought for thousands, we have actually sold for hundreds of thousands in a socially and ethnically cleansed, gentrified new Hackney as theme park. And having lived in Hackney most of my life, I'm often quite bemused at how gentrification has altered the space. But on some level, why it has, and new people have come in, and as I've mentioned, what interesting, the people that my parents, in a sense, bought the house from originally in 1972-3, ironically look like the same people now, in a sense. And so you have the people who had the white flight originally, when immigrants started to arrive in urban areas like Hackney, have kind of almost returned to reclaim these spaces. The front room has disappeared, and yet we carry history with us. And the values embodied in the front room's material culture still speaks to the domestic life of subsequent Black British generations, a life still largely unknown in British society. Now, returning to the PhD, a practice-based PhD. My external examiners at my PhD viva were Jatinder Verma, former artistic director of Tara Arts, an Asian British theatre company in South London, and Jen Doi, professor of visual arts at De Montfort University, who interestingly would eventually leave academia and take up a visual arts BA degree at UAL, okay, to retrain as an artist. In fact, we're still in touch, and I think she's subsequently completed an MA. I did my research on both my external examiners, so I kind of knew in a sense what questions they were asked in the conversation we had. I prepared, and in a sense it went like a good dream. I was largely in control of that viva. There were no amendments, and when I left the room I was told that I could call myself doctor. Susan told me that I now had the privilege to espouse theory and be listened to. Outside on the grounds of Middlesex University, I lit up a big head to celebrate, patted myself on my chest. I was the first Arts Doctorate at Middlesex University in 2010. That is me. Questions, discussion. As I said, this is a kind of anti-lecture, so it's a kind of more a conversational piece, as it were. And so I'm interested in the conversations, if people are able to use audio or the chat box. Any questions, comments, queries, any things that points that people wanted me to go over. I'm envisaging that the audience are themselves PhD students, practice-based, well, maybe a collection of PhD students and practice-based PhD students. One of the challenges I would add, and this is from my experience co-supervising current practice-based students at the moment at UAL, which includes about 4. The challenge is always writing about your practice. We kind of, as artists, we kind of, as I said, we do things intuitively. You know, there's not much conscious thought. But then in a PhD, we're invited to write about the process, that journey. What is the work that makes the work or finishes the work if it's finished? What is the process? That is not as easy. So on that, in that context, there might be people who want to come around and say, okay, yeah, it is difficult. It is challenging to write about practice. And how do you situate your practice within a community of practice? What is the conversation going on between your work and other work of practitioners within a similar field? Thank you all. You're welcome. I can hear people writing. Is that Maureen Salmon?
Yes, and I want to comment.
Pick you up. You can't escape, girl.
Yeah, I don't want to take the space first. So.
Take the space, Maureen, because nobody else ain't.
Okay. I put my camera on, obviously. This is just absolutely wonderful, Michael. And the more times I hear your story, the richer it gets. And I've known you since you were a theatre practitioner back in Camden when I was an arts officer there. So I've seen that amazing journey that you talked about, and so delighted, to where you are now. And actually, you were the person when I thought about coming in to UAL as an AL, associate lecturer, that I rang up and we had a talk about it, and you encouraged me to do it. So here I am still. So this intellectual isolation is an interesting starting point, because I think for many of us, including myself, that's such still is a huge barrier. And for you to have navigated that terrain, and how important it is to highlight the support that you need along the way on that journey. And I want to say, for obviously students here who they are on their research, so they have navigated in, but getting in is just kind of the beginning of the journey. And I know many who artists, Black artists, it's taken like 12 years to get the PhD, and over the years I've explored it and never followed it, and never kind of got very far for the same reason. Not understood. And so this point, the next one is around how you situate your practice. Is critical even when you are on the journey as the PhD journey. And I've just started to supervise, so I'm on this journey of learning how to, and the practice PhD is such an amazing pathway to go, and the practice creates more opportunities for where you want to kind of take your practice, I think, as opposed to just doing a straight piece of academic research, and depending on where you are in your career. So it's been an incredible journey to actually see. And a young member of my family sent me this same image that's on the screen, because it's the one at the Tate, isn't it, at the moment?
That's right. It's at Tate Britain now,
and said, this is an inspiration for our new house, our new house, for the front room in our new house. So the message back, actually, you just need to go over to Mum, and you will find all this stuff there that you can take and recreate it in your new space. So what's interesting is what we didn't like when we were growing up, because we had a front room or front rooms like that. Is that we just kind of wanted to get away from it, but actually now it's an inspiration. People want to recreate that front room.
That's right. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that, Maureen. I mean, just responding to some of your points you made, I mean, theatre is still part of my practice. I mean, that's why I talked about waiting for myself to appear. So it's never left me. And in a sense, the front room, I'm interested in the performative response to it when people come in, so as an installation. And in Tate Britain, everything is tied down or glued down, as different from the Museum of the Home, because in installing it, I was told people are just going to take stuff. So there are a few things not in there because people would just take stuff. The issue of intellectual isolation is a crucial issue. What does it speak to? It speaks to a classic issue of Black people in white institutions. So it's not simply within the academy. You know, I know of people in major cultural institutions are going through some struggles now. A kind of coloniality which is still there. It's never gone away. And my advice, even for people here in any university, is to get your network and support. Do not be isolated. Yeah, connect with your community of interest and community of practice. Essentially, that's what I did. I reached out, and I also, it's important to realize that a PhD is a cultural political object. Why was I invited to do the PhD at MMU when really the supervisor really couldn't do anything about the field of research? Okay, because it would be they were ticking their box of diversity. If I'm crude here, but I also at one point reached out. I reached out to Lola Young. I said, I'm going through this struggle here, and she was really empathetic. You know, and suggested a strategy to turn that around. So my advice is to always be non-isolated, to have your posse, as it were, of support. And particularly, you know, if one is working not only as a student, a postgraduate student, but also as a member of staff, to have that network. It's fundamental. It's fundamental. But I want to understand also how the institution works. The institution are people. It's not bricks, it's people. How does it work? How does power work within the institution? What is the leverage? Who are the kind of key power brokers going on? You know, how can you make alliances with those individuals? You know, this is organizational psychology. And then also, you've also talked about embarking on a PhD. It's not for the faint-hearted. Mine took 10 years, and I'm quite proud of it taking 10 years. I'm not seeing it. I have no regrets, because in that time, my practice changed. I changed. I moved on. I grew up. And I also think that every time I do something on the front room, I'm always saying something different, because it's always changing. I'm changing. And as an older Black man now, I've reached 60. I've reached 60 now, and I'm proud of it. You know, I'm looking at the front room and looking forward. So I hope that kind of addresses some of the points you kind of made, Maureen, and thank you for sharing your input.
You have, Michael. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'm there with you in terms of the age. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I wouldn't embark on it. You know, I thought carefully about it, unless I was going to do, you know, actually Middlesex have ones where you do the write-up, and I don't want to write. And I'm doing some really interesting things with artists around my practice. And, you know, for artists, you're lucky. If you're like me, that have a practice, but, you know, not defined as an artist, although other artists have been saying to me, but, you know, you are an artist, and I've never defined myself as such. You know, you create and you make things, and you make things happen, you know, through artistic practice, and it's much more difficult. And I made a decision that actually what I want to do is to support and enable others to get beyond this intellectual isolation and cultural isolation of a PhD. And it's not be all and end all. But the most important thing that you do is that you are advancing your practice
Yeah.
And not having a PhD for the sake of a PhD, and I've never wanted that. So thank you.
Yeah, and there's also I also believe that you can have a PhD because for no other reason that you just want to develop yourself. I have doing a PhD. One have to ask oneself, why does one want to do it? Why would you want to do a PhD? That's a crucial question. How will you use it? How do you envisage using it? Yeah. I will also add, Maureen, that you are creative. You're a cultural practitioner. You're a cultural producer. It all involves creativity. You know, artists do not have to preserve over creativity. You know, we do not. Creativity is everyone has a space to be creative in what they do.
Thank you.
Michael, we have one hand up and there's one question in the chat. I think the hand went up first. Do you want me to read the question?
Go on, read the question. Sorry.
Catherine, jump on the mic, go for it, and I'll.
Okay,
Judah, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, Michael. I just wanted to say you're always such an inspiration. But I particularly wanted to speak to what you were saying about when especially on a part-time PhD. I'm facing year 6, and I really lots of the things you've said about and what Maureen has said, for all kinds of different reasons we share these senses of isolation and often feeling misplaced or losing our way. But when you were saying about sometimes you run out of road with your supervisors, or they're not on the same level, or especially with a part-time PhD, you wander off into a different, that the question becomes something that you didn't think it was at the start. And I just think you've given an incredible insight in how to own our processes and dig and make something that is really sometimes subliminal and not expressed, put it out there and sort of, because I think quite often the supervisory experience, for no fault of the supervisors, can be quite disappointing and quite administrative. And at some point you just have to own your, we have to own our project for its own value, and sort of, because we're all in uncomfortable positions, because we're all creating new knowledge at the boundaries of awkward things. And I think everyone feels out of kilter at sometimes, and I think so I just want to say thank you for that. You really reminded me that it's
welcome.
Kind of up to us to kind of claim the territory.
I mean, as a fellow comrade and colleague, Catherine, I mean, one of the simple things is that you're paying for it, so it belongs to you. It's yours. And okay, so then now, how do we then negotiate with a supervisory team what will help you? And sometimes you're not aware of what's going to help you, but you do have rights over the way that information and input and support that you want from your supervisory team. And I sometimes think, even as a supervisor myself, that I think that the institution should provide a bit more of a model about how to supervise. And I notice people say, but there are these research things going on. Yes, that's really important. And one of my colleagues, Mark Ingram, is brilliant at, what is the nature of supervision? So it's a conversation, but fundamentally, the PhD belongs to you.
Yeah.
It is yours. And so ownership and agency are crucial within that. And talking to other PhD students, what is their experience? This is kind of the intellectual isolation that I think, I mentioned and Napoleon picked up. What are other PhD students experiencing?
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Any other points, questions, queries, contentions?
The question in the chat that comes from Judah, it says, thank you, Michael. You mentioned circular feedback in art practice. as being similar to the methodology of action research. Do you
Yes.
think there are enough similarities to model PhD methodology on action research strategies?
Possibly. That's a really good point, Lucy. Although action research tends to, within an upper disciplinary field, within sociology.
So this is absolutely somebody thinking through the possibilities or not of action research.
I mean, you know, the research method on a practice-based PhD is so kind of crucial that I think it's worth applying and checking out action research methods as a process, because it allows you this feedback loop. It allows you, in a sense, to initiate a series of questions and inquiries, and then in the field, because research is messy, yeah, it's complex, it's difficult, it's a struggle. And you're going to discover things you hadn't anticipated. And that's why the circular feedback loop allows you to always go out, come back, go out, come back, reevaluate what you're thinking of. You're still in a sense, you're still controlling the direction. The direction hasn't changed. It's how you go about that may have altered in a sense. And something new may have emerged. And it's I suppose being okay with that new thing that emerges, and where does that take us, and can we go down that path? Yeah, how does it alter what you're originally thinking of? Is that helpful? It's a fluidity that I think a practice-based PhD can offer, in a sense. And yeah, action research methods or strategies are quite valuable.
Lovely. Other questions? We've got 5 minutes as a final chance.
This has been good. This is fun. Yeah, go on.
Henry, please.
Yes. Hi, Michael. Thank you. That was very fascinating. I just have a comment, really, because I just thought it's very beautiful how this process has gone from the first image that you showed of the room, and then how you've taken your experience and your process, and then put all of that into this new room that others can experience, and then that kind of continues your process through other people as well, and it kind of just grows and builds. It's very poetic, really.
Thank you. You've made my day. Thank you. Did you have a comment? I mean, what are you doing?
What I'm doing currently? In the tiniest of nutshells, I'm doing a practice-led PhD that's concerned with people's experiences of intensely evocative garments.
So it's all about embodiment and the sensuality.
Yes, in a way, yeah. It's about that type of the idea that you know, sometimes, which I'm sure you've probably thought about yourself during your, you know, when you're working with your practice, how certain material things have a kind of intangible presence that, you know, you can sense it's there, but you know, you can't really, it's nothing you can objectively analyze, but you know,
it has agency. It has agency, and the fact is, you're absolutely right. It does something to us. It has an effect on it has effect.
Yes, yeah.
Has effect.
Exactly.
And I mean, I do teach at London College of Fashion, so we're always engaged with these kind of questions. I do find it fascinating, and maybe because of theatre, I'm interested in performativity, you know. I hope you're kind of embracing performativity, because it's such a fascinating, in terms of the garment, as a thing that, and I do agree it's intangible, but it actually, there is something to talk about the immaterial here. That's fascinating. The ontology, that state of being, as it were, the phenomenology. You know, I'm pushing out all these ideas constantly. You're probably familiar with anyway.
Yeah,
it
no,
sounds fascinating.
especially phenomenology. That's precisely what part of my methodology draws on.
Wonderful.
And capturing that kind of experience, pre-reflective experience.
And are you a maker? Oh, we're going to cut off now.
It's fascinating stuff, but challenging.
Yes.
But yeah, I thought I can kind of, there's, you know, even just looking at your picture here, it's, you know, you can, there's some kind of, you can kind of get this feeling of the space even just through the image.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, we could go on with this conversation, Eureka, but I don't know if we're going to be cut off. It's
yeah, I think.
I don't.
So thank you very much, and
You're
yeah,
welcome. Welcome.
let someone else comment.
So now, how much time do we have, Lucy?
We do end in a minute, but if anyone's got a burning question, they should ask it. I just flagged in the chat that of course you do supervise now. I'm not claiming the last question spot, but I just wanted to bring it into the room. It's interesting, no, that your own journey is one thing, and then, as Maureen was saying too, then you also supervise, and that has its own lessons for you as a teacher, as well as
that's right. That's right.
Might be.
That's right. And one of the things I've learned and understood as a supervisor is that you're beside the student, you're beside the PhD, because you're going through a journey yourself with them, along with them. That is very important as a supervisor. You're going, you know, you're going on a journey with them. It's part of their process.
Maybe the model we need. You said we like models. I'm just being selfish here and claiming my own learning, but as a supervisor, to be given to learn with your students. So please, Henrika, jump in.
Sorry, just thought it's quicker than trying to type it, but just about the journey as a supervisor. I think that's a lovely aspect of doing the PhD, is that although it's my journey, I'm also sharing it with my supervisors, and I think that's wonderful.
And they're learning something. I know I'm learning something. I'm learning something. You know, the more I know is the less I know, folks. Like, hey, it's exciting. It's exciting. My God, you know, and the wonderful work that students are producing and areas that they're discovering and things that are unpacked. And it's like, wow.
Joanna, please.
Hi, thank you, Michael, for sharing. One thing that came out for me, because I'm Portuguese, my family is in France. I was born in France, so it's a bit of a mix. My grandparents are in Portugal, and when I saw your rooms, one thing that came out to me was my attachment and the emotions that I get now when I get to my grandparents in Portugal, and I see your, you know, the crafts of you. I read your articles about the you know the crochet that your aunt was doing, and my grandmother crochets as well. And when I was younger, it was like, oh, that's old, that's, you know, that's kitsch, and I was going home and and I'm now a maker, so it's, and I crochet, I knit and everything, and when I go to my grandparents and I get that all those pictures of all the family, and I've got a big family, it's like, oh, that's so old, you know. And now when I go, it's just, I just have that attachment to it, and I look at all the pictures and I feel that it's slipping away, you know, and it's and soon I won't have that attachment anymore, and because my grandparents, you know, they'll be leaving in some years. Or so what kind of reactions have you had from people of like the younger generations when they come to your rooms, and do they get back to their parents and grandparents like, oh, actually I want to know about this? What are the reactions you've had from the younger generation?
Well, I can show you a little story. When we were installing the room at Tate Britain, I was working with young white art handlers. These are former students of UAL, some of them. and they loved doing it because they were talking about their grandparents and their their aunties and uncles, and people would want to during the install. And Life Between Zion is a massive show. The art handlers would want to come into the room and just chill out and just reminisce and talk about, oh, we had one of them, we had one of them, we had that. Not just black, I mean, our kind of cross-section of people. And what it just reminds me, and why I've used that quote from James Baldwin, is that we carry history with us. But often we don't realize that. We don't realize that, as you said, is it Joanna, until a certain event or thing happens, that we then realize we have that moment of epiphany. It's like, my God, I'm doing the very things now that I, in an earlier age, were ambivalent about. And in a way, what you're doing, you're embodying your ancestors through your practice now. So yes, they are gone physically. They're gone physically, but spiritually, they live through you.
Thank you.
I come from a culture where there is no life and death is part of a circle that has no end and no beginning.
Yeah, thank you. I'll keep that in keeping my grandmother's heritage in my practice and for my children as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for questions all. Thank you, Michael.